of whether perhaps Saudi individuals were implicated. Will these documents shed some light? That's what the American public wants to know. That's what the survivors of the family members, the survivors, and the first responders, that's what they want to know as well.
Another open question has been, how much did or should the U.S. government have known about these attackers and whether this type of attack was possible before 9/11?
Yeah.
A lot of people, especially for the public, this came out of nowhere.
Absolutely.
For the government, should they have known more?
For your average Joe Schmo out there, the average, member of the public, they really only had a vague idea of what al-Qaeda was, if at all, including Osama bin Laden. They were not front and center on the radar. Now, you could say in retrospect, in hindsight today, how could you have not known about al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden? Doesn't hold true for the U.S. government. There were many warning signs in July 10th, 2001, right? Just over 2 months before the attacks. An FBI agent in Phoenix wrote a memo saying that he had discovered certain men of Middle Eastern origin doing flight training in Phoenix area flight schools. What's that about? The director of the CIA at the time, his name was George Tenet, briefed officials across the government, including the then security advisor Condoleezza Rice, on what he said was a clear and imminent al-Qaeda threat. And here's one for you. August 6th, 2001. Do your math. That's just over a month before these attacks. Memo lands on George W. Bush's, the president's desk, saying, Osama bin Laden determined to strike U.S. Now, from there, you could say, well, they knew. But it's still a big leap. And like I said, hindsight is always 20/20 to say, well, it was all out there. But to think that people were going to...
How many memos are coming across the president's
Not just
desk?
that. Who really would have made that connection? It seems so implausible that you would commandeer commercial airliners and essentially turn them into fuel-laden explosive missiles and plunge them into the facades of skyscrapers in New York City. It sounded like the most ridiculous, far-fetched idea if you had said it at the time. So yes, al-Qaeda was on the radar. Yes, George W. Bush knew who Osama bin Laden was when he heard his name whispered in his ear on September 11th. They all had heard of him. But to connect all those dots, very few people really had done that, and most people in government would not have really been able to put two and two together at this time and envisioned a scenario as catastrophic as those images that our viewers are looking at on their screen.
International Affairs commentator Douglas Herbert, thank you for bringing us that perspective. 2 years after 9/11 and the start of America's war on terror, the U.S. invaded Iraq on false claims that then-leader Saddam Hussein was hiding weapons of mass destruction. France 24's Jack Hewson in Baghdad tells us how the U.S. invasion destabilized the country.
Talking to people here, there's a sense that 9/11 marks the beginning of the war on terror, which obviously was disastrous for this country. There was no issue of terrorism in Iraq prior to 9/11, and none of the hijackers on that day were Iraqi. And yet George Bush speciously linked 9/11 to Iraq, and then further speciously claimed that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction. And it's these falsehoods that were used to invade the country, and Iraqis resent the fact that this lie was used for an agenda which ultimately ruined their nation. No one here misses Saddam Hussein very much, but they very much regret and resent the sectarian meltdown that was subsequent to his ouster. The sectarian war of the 2000s led to 70,000 civilian casualties just between 2006 and 2008 at the peak of the war, and there were many thousand more, 67,000 more during the war with ISIS, another sectarian war between 2014 and 2017. So this is all deeply ironic, given that the entire point of the US invasion was to avoid the formation of a rogue terrorist state. Instead, that's exactly what happened. Literally, the formation of a so-called fundamentalist Islamic state in Iraqi sovereign territory, from which terror was exported across the globe. And nowhere is that irony felt more bitterly than here in Iraq.
France 24's Jack Hewson reporting there from Baghdad. France 24 will have special coverage of the 20th anniversary of 9/11 throughout the day. The first special begins at 2 p.m. Central European Time. That's just at the top of the next hour. We do hope you'll join us.
Hello, and thank you for being with us here on Talking Europe on France 24, where today I'll be speaking to the European Union's ambassador to the United States, Stavros Lambrinidis. This is very much a time, of course, when transatlantic relations are playing on many European minds. It is now 20 years since the September 11th attacks, and people in Europe and around the world, of course, remembering the almost 3,000 people who died. Well, many leaders here in Europe also taking this moment to reassess their relations with the United States. Already in 2021, we've seen President Joe Biden come to office seemingly promising more harmonious relations than under his predecessor, Donald Trump. But President Biden has frustrated and angered many European partners just months later by pushing on with the US pullout from Afghanistan, with the chaotic consequences still unfolding as we speak. Well, Stavros Lambrinidis, thank you very much for joining us from Washington, D.C.
Great to be with you, Catherine.
I'd just like to start off by asking you, where were you on September 11th, 2001, and what do you remember of that day?
I was in the Greek Foreign Ministry. I was an ambassador at large at the time, and it was early afternoon in Greece. And what I can remember is the absolute disbelief and shock. There was a little TV in the kitchen next to the minister's office, and someone shouted, and I ran in, and a couple of other people also ran in, and we saw the first plane falling on the first tower. And I can tell you, in an instant, we all felt that this was an attack on us as well. It was very guttural. It became supremely clear that democracies were being attacked, our values were being attacked, not just a particular tower in a particular country. And for those few hours after that, in addition to trying to understand what was happening, we were trying to figure out how to express in the most unconditional way our feeling that we were all Americans at that moment.
The most pressing issue in the transatlantic relationship right now, arguably, what's going on in Afghanistan. And it's true that the US pullout was done with little consultation with European states or other partners, and it really caused chaos for those states and their citizens in Afghanistan. Given all of this, was Joe Biden, in fact, irresponsible to insist on going through with this withdrawal the way he did?
Well, I mean, we've had discussions about this with the administration, but let us not lose the focus of this. The real tragedy in Afghanistan is for the Afghan people themselves. After decades of bloody fighting, they are where they were. And of course, it's a major setback for the international community. What we are focusing on as Europeans here is the immediate future, not the past. We have a direct interest in what happens in Afghanistan, whether it is with protecting Afghanis who work with us and they need protection leaving, or with dealing with the potentially massive migration and refugee flows, or dealing with the drug trade, or certainly dealing with terrorism and radicalization. So all EU foreign ministers got together and said, look, we have to work with the new government because there are things that we need to get done immediately. We need to make sure that people can still leave the country. We need to make sure that humanitarian aid to go directly to the people that are starving now in Afghanistan can go through without impediment. We need to make sure that, the Taliban stick by the word and terrorism does not flourish again in that country. We need to make sure that human rights are respected. And let me just say something about that last point. You know what? The Taliban a few years back planted a bullet in Malala Yousafzai's head, a young girl in Pakistan that was advocating for women's education. Now, if terrorists are giving you a signal that they hate educated and empowered girls, guess what you should be doing as the international community? Ensuring that those girls are getting educated.